Today we're going to look at the story of Joseph. And Joseph, he is a descendant of Abraham. So it was Abraham who had Isaac, who had Jacob and Esau. And Jacob had Joseph. And Joseph was one of Jacob's, he was not the youngest son, but he was one of the younger sons. And he was, one of his favorite sons. And Jacob's sons, they all knew that. They all knew that Joseph was his favorite. And Joseph one day had a dream that he would rule over his siblings. Just to give you a little bit of backstory about Joseph. And his brothers did not like that, and they ended up throwing him into slavery, selling him into slavery, throwing him into a ditch and selling him into slavery. And his father did not know that they did that. They had told their father that Joseph was eaten by a wild animal. And they even brought back this cloak that Jacob had given Joseph and said, we brought back his cloak. And Jacob was just heartbroken. Now, if you know the story of Joseph, you know what ends up happening. He did end up ruling over his brothers and he ended up helping them out. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about when Joseph arrived, right? We're not going to talk about when God fulfilled the promise. We're going to talk about what happened at one of Joseph's lowest points, actually. And one thing about life that is guaranteed is trouble. It's in the Bible. Everybody will have trouble. We all go through low points. And while it's natural for us to want to skip past those low points, it is a part of life. And it's important to cling to God during that times, as he can guide you and take you through that process and help you to become more like Christ. And so when we pick up in the text here, I'm going to pick up in Genesis chapter 40. Now, Joseph, he was working for Potiphar. And Potiphar, he was working in Potiphar's house. And Potiphar's wife, she wrongfully accused Joseph of trying to sleep with her. And so Joseph was thrown into prison wrongfully. While he was in prison, there were the cupbearer and the baker, and they were some officials of the Pharaoh. And they both had a dream, and they asked Joseph to interpret those dreams. And Joseph interpreted them correctly, if you read in Genesis 40. And the cupbearer, the chief cupbearer, he was freed and he went back to his position. But before he was freed, he told Joseph, because you interpreted this dream for me, I will help you out. I will not forget you. Actually, let's read it verbatim, okay? It says, I'm reading Genesis chapter 40, verse 20. Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And that's where Genesis 40 leaves off. And the verse that I found interesting, when you flip over to Genesis 41, is the first verse. And there's so much power. There's so much power in this first verse. It says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile. Let's just stop there. When 2 full years, we're not talking about 2 days. We're not talking about 2 months, okay? Joseph is in a prison. First of all, if you go back to the story of Joseph, so many times he was wrong. He should not have been anywhere near there. He was thrown into slavery, and then he was given favor with Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife just decided that she wanted to sleep with Joseph, and he had morals and standards. He's a man of God. He said no. So she got mad and wrongfully accused him of rape and trying to sleep with her. And then he got thrown into prison. And then to top it all off, he, did something for the cupbearer, and the cupbearer was like, yeah, I'll definitely remember you. Nope, he forgot about him. Joseph is in the prime situation to turn his back on God. This is a prime example of someone who may say, you know what? I'm all set with this God stuff. Where are you, God? You are not with me. It's one thing if we sin or we mess up, or, if we disobey God and we end up in a particular circumstance that's a little rough. That's one thing. And I think for me, it's easier for me to kind of accept that and just go through it, even though we'll have circumstances, because we didn't make the best decisions. I kind of get that more. Okay, yeah, I messed up, than if you did nothing wrong and you get thrown into a situation. Joseph didn't do anything. The things that he was going through was not caused by his sin or it was not his fault. And yet he sat there for years. Now we see that 2 full years had passed when he was in prison, but it had been longer since he had even seen his father, since he'd been with his family, since he was thrown into slavery. So this situation that he's been in altogether was 4 years. But one thing that we get to see in the text that Joseph doesn't know in the moment is that he is in a period of transition. And transition is a period of time where, maybe you've heard this before, I'm sure many of you have, God is taking you from one place to another. And I found that we are continuously in a place of transition, right? We're never really at a place where, you take a deep breath and then you think, well, I have arrived. There's nothing left for me to do here. At least I don't ever feel like that. I feel like God is always taking me to a new level. Now, I don't necessarily mean stuff like money or jobs or, because at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't matter. But God could be taking you to a new level spiritually, relationally. It does not necessarily mean tangible items. So whatever it is that you feel like God is taking you to the next step, there is a period of time where you're in between, and that is the transition. And one thing that we can see here in the text is, so Genesis 41 starts off with Joseph being in prison in 2 years. By the time you get to the end of Genesis 41, it says Joseph is in charge of Egypt. How crazy is that? How much can change with God's hand, with God's provision? And so one thing about transition is that you never know when that change will come. And you never know when that next thing will happen. So it's important to focus on your attitude during that time. One thing that about Joseph's attitude, and we can glean that from the text, it doesn't say it verbatim, but you can find that from his attitude, is that he remained faithful to God. When Pharaoh had called him and, Pharaoh wanted him to come interpret his dream, because the cupbearer finally remembered, oh, wait a minute, 2 years later, I know this guy who's sitting in the prison, he can help you, Pharaoh. And so what did Joseph say when Pharaoh called him to interpret his dream? Genesis 41, verse 16. Let's go back to verse 15, actually. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And so Joseph, he didn't become bitter. He didn't say, I don't know, I can't do this. Or, he didn't have an egotistical mindset. He gave the glory back to God, and he was able to efficiently interpret Pharaoh's dream. And he was able to do that because he walked closely with God. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. There is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. And so even though Joseph is sitting in the bottom of a jail cell, he knows that God is with him, and he can rely on God just as we can when we're in a dark place. And so if you're in a period of transition where, you're going from one place and then to the next, and maybe your transition, maybe you're in a dark place financially, or you're praying for that job or that house, or maybe you're in a dark place relationally, or maybe you're just not sure what the next thing should be. Focus on today and focus on what God is telling you. Now, I did have someone ask recently, how do I know what God is talking to me and what he's saying to me? And it's important that you read his word. Open up the Bible and read it. Open up the Bible and read it. Listen to worship music. There is truly nothing like reading his word and praying. He will put scriptures on my heart sometimes, and then I'll open it up, and it's exactly what I needed to hear for that day. Or, I will just be reading my Bible for the day and I will come across some scripture and God will reveal it to me in a fresh new way that I needed to hear. Just yesterday, I was reading my Bible and God pointed me right to forgiveness and bitterness. So please don't always think that it's going to be something that you necessarily want to hear, because a lot of times it's things that challenges us. But the more you seek him, the more he will speak. But you have to seek him. You have to seek him. There's days where I'm frustrated and I'm cranky and I'm bitter, and those are the days that I did not start my day off with God, probably, that I'm not seeking him as much as I should. Because seeking him will align you to hear from him, and hearing from him will help you to become more Christ-like. And so maybe you're in this period of transition, but just remember Joseph. He was in that period of transition too. He started off in Genesis 41, sitting in a prison for 2 years, and by the end of it, he was in charge of Egypt. So you never know when your moment is coming. Continue to hold fast to God. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please let me know what you learned. I post a new Bible study video, or I try to, on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties lately, and plus just some weeks I just feel like God wants me to take a step back and refocus on him. So I have been very inconsistent. I apologize, but I will never just disappear. I'll always come back. I will always come back. So thank you so much, and I can't wait to study the Bible with you again.